and thank you for joining us for today's EPA's Tools and Resources webinar on the Proctor Creek Watershed Story Map. Today's webinar will provide an overview of story maps and how they can be used, featuring the recently developed Proctor Creek Watershed Story Map as an example. If you have a related science question during or after the presentation, please type it into the Q&A window at any time, and once the presentation ends, we will answer as many questions as time allows. You can listen through your computer speakers. EPA plans to post today's PowerPoint presentation and recording to our website within 2 weeks. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Wayne Cassio, the Director of EPA ORD's Center for Public Health and Environmental Assessment, to introduce our presenter and webinar topic. Wayne?
Thank you, Lisa. And as Lisa said, I'm Wayne Cassio, and I direct the Center for Public Health and Environmental Assessment, or as we call it, CEPHEA. And just a few words about CEPHEA before we turn the presentation over. CEPHEA provides the science needed to understand the complex interrelationship between people and nature. All of our science is to protect human health and ecological integrity. Through the hard work of our scientists and their resulting innovative research, our center supports the advancement of knowledge, informing the links between environmental conditions and the health and well-being of people and society. We often conduct research supporting EPA's Sustainable and Healthy Communities, or SHC research program, which is one of 6 national research programs within EPA's Office of Research and Development. The goal of SHC is to provide technical solutions, tools, information, and other resources to fulfill the agency's mission to safeguard public health and the environment. This includes meeting the needs and collaborating with our communities. One area of particular importance to our agency is that of environmental justice, the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. As part of the SHC initiative and in support of the environmental justice movement, CEPHEA researchers work with colleagues in our Region 4 Southeast Office and the Proctor Creek community of Atlanta, Georgia, to develop a story map to highlight the role that green infrastructure plays in improving community and environmental health and sustainability. This interactive online tool promotes environmental education and is a resource the community has helped build and can use for collaboration and exploration of creative solutions to restore their watershed. The project serves as an outstanding example of the great impact that we can have when we work together with our states and communities to emphasize lived experiences as critical data, and we empower citizens. I'm so pleased this afternoon to introduce to you Shannon Griffin, one of our lead scientists that led the collaboration and development of the Proctor Creek Watershed Story Map. Over to you, Shannon.
All right, great. Thank you, Lisa and Wayne, for the wonderful introductions. And thank you all for the opportunity to talk to you today about our Proctor Creek Story Map. So this project, as Wayne said, has been a great collaborative effort among the Proctor Creek community in Atlanta, Georgia, the EPA Region 4 office in Atlanta, and folks in the Office of Research and Development, along with Pegasus Technical Services. So this project tells the story of the Proctor Creek watershed and the role that green infrastructure can play in community health. And you see here a screenshot of what the story map looks like. Just to get us oriented, the outlined area is the Proctor Creek watershed, and Proctor Creek snakes its way through downtown Atlanta. You see down here, it flows northwest and eventually makes its way to the Chattahoochee River up here. So before we get to our background information and our story map tour, I want to take a step back for a moment. As you heard from Wayne, EPA's mission is to safeguard public health and the environment. And part of our mandate is to restore and maintain watersheds and their aquatic ecosystems to protect human health, support economic and recreational activities, and provide healthy habitat for fish, plants, and wildlife. As you all know, this takes a lot of coordination and informed decision-making and actions at the local and state levels to be successful. And to inform and legitimize that decision-making process, strategies are needed to involve impacted stakeholders. And along those same lines, it's essential that we have accessible tools to share information and support participatory decision-making with stakeholders in mind. So here's our problem. How do we involve stakeholders, communities, those impacted by our decisions and actions, and then what tools do we have or need to support these interactions? So I'm going to talk to you today about some approaches and tools we've used effectively, and then tell you more about our case study example with the Proctor Creek Watershed Story Map. So first off, a community-driven approach improves engagement and collaboration, and these are great ways to build trust, create social capital, and harness that collective genius to help make better decisions. Story maps are an excellent tool for information sharing. They provide an interactive online format for digital storytelling. And story maps combine maps with narrative text, images, and multimedia content to convey information, and they help us really connect with, inform, and engage our viewers. Well, sorry, 1 second there. Accidentally clicked the link. Let me get back to those slides. All right, so let's get back to our story map project with a little bit of background. The Story Map Watershed is home to 38 neighborhoods, including some of the most economically disadvantaged and underserved areas in Atlanta. The watershed is also designated Priority Urban Waters Federal Partnership location and has experienced a number of environmental issues like frequent flooding, erosion, stormwater runoff, pollution from illegal dumping, and overflows from the city's combined sewer system. Now, given the history of flooding and water quality issues, in 2015, EPA worked with the City of Atlanta to conduct the Proctor Creek Boone Boulevard Green Street Health Impact Assessment, or HIA. And the goal here was to bring health considerations into evaluating proposed sites for implementing green infrastructure in the watershed to address some of those challenges I just mentioned. And just so we're on the same page, green infrastructure is a practice that uses plants, soils, and other natural features to manage wet weather impacts and reduce and treat stormwater at its source. So the Boone Boulevard HIA was a success in that it highlighted the health benefits of green infrastructure practices, but it did so on a smaller scale. And realizing the co-benefits to the city and the community, Atlanta actually extended the scope of their green infrastructure project. There was a lot of interest to look at green infrastructure throughout the entire watershed, and thus the story map was born. So the goal of the story map was to centralize information so that residents and stakeholders had resources literally at their fingertips to understand and address issues in their community using green infrastructure practices. And the story map offers content that is transparent, it's accessible, and it's useful. So I want to take a minute to go over our study team. The project was very much community driven. We actually worked with a community leadership team to support the story map efforts. And the key players involved here came from the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance. We had an Urban Waters Federal Partnership ambassador to Proctor Creek. We have 2 representatives from the Proctor Creek neighborhood planning units. We also have members of the Proctor Creek Stewardship Council as well as the Community Improvement Association. This team of community leaders was crucial in informing the content and format of the story map and helping us to gain that local knowledge on the various topics. In fact, it was this team that identified and prioritized the community concerns on which the story map would be focused. And these concerns are flooding, urban heat islands, and mosquitoes, and I'm going to tell you more about that in just a moment. So in keeping with that community focus, EcoAction, which is a nonprofit organization in Atlanta, was awarded an EPA Region 4 Urban Waters Small Grant, and the grantees were really critically important in facilitating that community engagement piece. They assisted with outreach activities and with developing some of the content that you're going to see in the story map and have just really been invaluable to this project. We also had a number of technical staff in the EPA Region 4 office in Atlanta, and those of us in the ORD Cincinnati office, along with our on-site technical support contractors, Pegasus Technical Services. So the photos on the right highlight part of our engagement activities. For example, our community partner held a kickoff workshop to identify community concerns. They hosted a number of green infrastructure tours throughout the watershed to educate residents and decision makers on green infrastructure. They also gathered the community story through photos and storytelling, which are all featured in the story map. And then lastly, they held a final community workshop to review the story map with us, and over 50 community members attended. We actually revised the map based on what we heard at this meeting. So there's this real sense, and rightfully so, that we co-developed and co-own this product. All right, so let's get to the map. I'm going to give you a brief overview. So for those of you that would like more time with the map or just want to learn more about the project, the story map link, a fact sheet, and project description can all be found at EPA's Health Impact Assessment webpage. All right, let's bring the map up again. Okay, so welcome to the Proctor Creek Watershed Story Map landing page. You can see that there are 11 tabs across the top here, and these cover a variety of topics, including those 3 community identified concerns: flooding, heat, and mosquitoes. And then we also have our big feature, green infrastructure. Now, the first tab here gives you some instructions on how to use the story map, and it also includes a list of contributors, which was very important to us and our community leadership team to see their efforts acknowledged right up front here. I'm going to jump over to the introduction tab, and for the sake of time, I'm not actually going to go through the introduction tab, but it does tell you about the story map. It provides information on the history of Proctor Creek, some demographic information, challenges, and community organizing. So this is an amazing community of advocates and environmental stewards, but we also know that Proctor Creek was designated an environmental justice community of concern, and it's a priority urban waters location and has experienced a number of issues, as we talked about, like frequent flooding, stormwater runoff, and overflows from the city's combined sewer system. So the Watershed Tour tab is next, and this is where we can virtually peruse portions of the watershed. 16 sites are actually featured here, and these were selected based on input from the community, which highlight important historical, cultural, and geographic locations throughout the watershed. So for example, we can look at Mount Moriah Baptist Church, where Gladys Knight began singing at age 5, and we can also see the former home of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King, amongst a number of other important sites. Now we're going to move on to the topic tabs. And each of the topic tabs, again, flooding, heat, mosquitoes, and green infrastructure, are all organized in the same way. We start by discussing the topic, we bring in some local baseline data, we talk about the effects of that topic on health, we discuss what's already being done to address the topic in the community, we give some ideas for what you as a community can do, as well as some resources for more information. And then we end each tab with definitions of key terms used in that tab. And these are indicated by this dotted underline in purple color. They're also available in a glossary, which is the very last tab. So a couple of other things about map logistics. Throughout the story map, you're going to see these quotes highlighted in green. These are from residents of Proctor Creek. They were collected by EcoAction as part of the grant I mentioned earlier, and this has really been a nice way to capture that community voice. A number of photos that are featured on the map were also taken by community members with the help of that Region 4 grant. So I do want to spend some time on the flooding tab because it is a very important concern to the community. We talk about a variety of issues related to flooding, like urban runoff, combined sewer overflows. We also talk about some water sampling efforts in the watershed. We discuss the issue with trash in Proctor Creek and talk a little about the Trash Free Waters Initiative. And this is a great partnership with Coca-Cola, the city of Atlanta, and a lot of community groups where they've set up these litter getters and larger bandalongs to trap trash in the creek. And as of the end of June 2020, these trash trap systems have collected over 1,400 pounds of trash from Proctor Creek. So I'm going to keep moving on here. We go through the importance of vegetation and soils and reducing stormwater runoff and removing pollutants. And then I'm going to jump ahead again. And this is where we have our grid metric analysis. This is where we use maps to identify where flooding may occur in the watershed. So what we've done is we've layered the FEMA special flood hazard areas, impervious surfaces, elevation, and tree canopy cover. And these layers were used to generate a grid showing the areas in Proctor Creek that are most likely to experience flooding. The darker the blue, the more likely to flood. So you can take this bar here and slide it to reveal the grid or the layers. So for example, down here in the Gulch around downtown Atlanta, we can see where there's a lot of impervious surfaces indicated by that purple color. We also see a higher potential for flooding indicated by the dark blue color. So I'm going to keep moving. We talk about how flooding can impact your health. We also talk about what's already being done in the watershed to address flooding, and this is broken out by effort. We have stormwater control, we have erosion control, and then we also have water quality. So for example, here we include information about Georgia's Adopt a Stream program, which is the state's volunteer or citizen science water quality monitoring program, and it includes a lot of outreach and education activities. And then we go on to talk about what you can do, like reporting issues and volunteering. We provide some more resources. And then we end with those key definitions that are relevant to the flooding tab. Now with heat and mosquitoes, they follow the same format, but I'm actually going to skip over those in an effort to keep this brief. I do want to go over the green infrastructure tab since it was a major focus of this project. So again, we're going to start out with the topic, what is green infrastructure? How can green infrastructure affect your health? Things like greater access to nature. We also have flood reduction, filtration and air pollutants, and even opportunities for recreation. We then provide some examples of how green infrastructure has been used to help address flooding and urban heat islands elsewhere in the United States. And then we show a map of locations that might benefit from green infrastructure in Proctor Creek. So this is another grid map, but this time we've taken the analyses done in flooding and heat and identified those areas in darker purple where green infrastructure could best be used to address flooding and heat island effects in the watershed and be of the greatest benefit to the community. So we then go through what's already being done in Proctor Creek and also in the city of Atlanta. And just as you see with other tabs, we share information about what you can do. We provide some more resources, and then we end with those key definitions again. So I'm going to jump right over to the Green Infrastructure Spotlight tab, and this is where the grant and the community engagement piece is really featured. There were 22 completed or in progress green infrastructure initiatives and projects within Proctor Creek that were selected by the community leadership team and grantees for this Spotlight tab. So I'm going to scroll down here again, zoom out a little bit, and we see our green infrastructure grid map again, showing in darker purple the locations in Proctor Creek where green infrastructure could best serve as a solution to flooding and heat island effects. And then we've added those 22 sites to this map. And to learn a little more about each green infrastructure spotlight, you can click on a point on the map and you see a pop-up with a little description and a picture. You'll notice that there are 7 projects with an orange dot, and these are highlighted in more detail below the map. So as you scroll down, you can learn more about these highlighted projects, which include the Proctor Creek Greenway, the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and several of the community-driven parks with purpose, as well as a few others. There's actually a lot of information here, so I will stop here at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. All right, we are almost done with the tour. We have 2 tabs dedicated to providing resources to users. One is on green infrastructure, and this is where we highlight tools and resources developed by EPA and others outside of the agency, like the Georgia Stormwater Management Manual here, or the Blue Book. This was developed by the Atlanta Regional Commission and working with the Georgia Department of Natural Resources Environmental Protection Division and others. And then this other tab provides resources about demographics and health in Proctor Creek. It also addresses additional concerns that were raised by the community, including illegal dumping of tires and trash, as well as toxic releases to land and brownfields. So that is it for our quick tour. Again, please do check out the map. It is a really cool project, and it's been a real honor working with the Proctor Creek community on this. So I'm going to go back to our slides. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the spatial analysis, those grid metric maps. So we did make lots of maps and data layers in creating our story map, but the spatial analyses are really the centerpiece of our spatial content. So the methodology here was based on this report, The Patterns of Pollution, a report on the demographics of pollution in Metro Atlanta. Now, again, the purpose of our analysis was to show where green infrastructure could best be used to address flooding and heat island effects and promote public health. It was a multi-step process. Step 1 was the data gathering and generating phase, and this is where we used data that were relevant to flooding, heat, or both. So things like tree canopy cover, impervious surface, wetness index, and others. These are indicated by the circle labeled 1 in the figure. Step 2 was to create a fishnet grid over the watershed and calculate metrics from the data for each fishnet grid cell. And we see these in circle 2. I do want to add that the final metrics included only polygon or raster data types. So for the polygons, the area of the metric within the cell was divided by the total cell area to get the proportion of that metric. And for the raster data, the mean value of all the pixels within each grid cell was calculated. So on to step 3, here we classified the grid counts into quantiles, and we ranked them according to their relationship to flooding or heat. And this is represented by the Excel table labeled 3 in the figure. So as I mentioned, the fishnet grid cell values were classified into quantiles, and if a given metric was conversely related to the outcome, the quantile values were reversed. So a metric with a positive influence on flooding would have a rank of 1 for grid cells with the most polygon area or highest raster average value. And a metric with a negative impact would have a rank of 5 for the highest percent areas or average values. I'd also like to point out that the metrics were normalized by taking quantiles of the quantiles, and it was these values that were used to make the maps in the next and final step. So at step 4, we created the maps showing the results of the analysis. You see this in circle 4. Ultimately, we posited that the grid cells with the highest quantile values, which equate to the darkest grid cells in the maps, are places where green infrastructure could best be used to address flooding and or urban heat island effects, and thus be of the greatest benefit to the community. So during our quick tour, we saw this analysis in the flooding and green infrastructure tabs. Same analysis was actually done for the heat tab. We envision these grid maps as a jumping off point for anyone in the community who has an idea or funding for a green infrastructure project and is interested in identifying optimal locations for these types of practices in the watershed. All right, so just a few words about what's come out of this project. First is that the Proctor Creek community can use the story map as an important decision support tool. It equips residents with knowledge to advocate for a healthier, more sustainable community. It also provides a common base of information for a number of activities, like understanding issues identified by community members and how these concerns impact health. It helps the community prioritize financial resources for sustainability and revitalization projects, and it improves collaboration and information sharing among local community organizations and government agencies. And last, it identifies areas that may benefit most from green infrastructure installations. So before we close, I wanted to talk a bit more about the significance of this project. The story map reinforces goals of the Urban Waters Federal Partnership to protect and restore America's urban waters. It really helps to reconnect the surrounding neighborhoods with their urban water environment. And this is all in an effort to promote healthy growth and economic opportunity in Proctor Creek. The work also supports the Sustainable and Healthy Communities program that Wayne told you about, and the goal of advancing knowledge, resources, and tools that communities need to achieve a healthy and resilient environment. In addition, the story map was highlighted as an example of effective partnership with environmental justice communities in EPA's FY 2020 annual EJ Progress Report. And last but certainly not least is that this map serves as a model approach to problem solving that all communities across the nation can use to address environmental and public health concerns in a more collaborative, innovative, and sustainable way. And I do want to add here that Dr. Nataki Osborne-Jelks, which is one of our community leadership team members, really summarized the impact best when she said, "The story map offers tools that community members can pursue in collaboration with government and other stakeholders to help achieve a swimmable, fishable, playable Proctor Creek and a restored community and people." Now, as we wrap up, I want to remind you of our 4 main takeaways for the day. The first one is that this is a story map, which means it's an interactive online tool that combines maps with narrative text and various images to tell a story and connect with and engage viewers. Number 2, this is a community-driven story map, meaning that EPA and community members collaborated to tell the story of Proctor Creek from the community's perspective. Next, this project serves to highlight the health benefits of green infrastructure. The goal here is to use the power of maps to show the role that green infrastructure can play in addressing various community identified concerns, and you see those at the bottom. Specifically, the community asked that we focus on flooding, urban heat islands, and mosquitoes, and the value that green infrastructure can bring to mitigating these challenges. And the last takeaway is that this project serves as a model approach to solving environmental and public health challenges that involves the community in the decision-making process. So with that, I'd like to extend a special thank you to our friends at Georgia Department of Natural Resources Environmental Protection Division and the City of Atlanta Department of Watershed Management. They provided a critical review of the story map and really offered some great insights throughout the life of this project. And I'd also like to thank you all so much for the opportunity to share this with you. I want to leave you with some great photos of Proctor Creek residents and one of their community gardens, as well as some quotes from EPA Administrator Regan and President Biden regarding our environmental and public health imperatives to address issues of environmental justice and the need to work with communities in doing so. And with that, feel free to reach out if you have any questions or want to learn more. My colleague Camilla Warren from our Atlanta office is also on the line. She is a wealth of information and was integral to our partnership with the Proctor Creek community, and we'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Again, I want to invite you to type your questions into the Q&A window, and we will